I'm going to introduce Professor Dean Scheibel from the School of Communication, or Department of Communication, and who's going to introduce tonight's guest.
My name is Dean Scheibel. Dean is my first name. I'm not the dean of anything. I have worked with Larry Wenner for a long time. Larry Wenner is the professor of communication and ethics, joint appointment for the College of Communication and Fine Arts and the School of Film and Television. He also directs the Forum on Media Ethics and Social Responsibility. He is a major, major figure in the area of media and sports, both in the disciplines of communication studies as well as sociology. He is the editor of 2 major sports journals. He has published 8 books and over 100 articles, including the one that he's going to talk to us about tonight, Fallen Sports Heroes, Media and Celebrity Culture, and Larry Wenner.
So we're going to dispense with this one. Off to the side here. Thank you all for coming. My book before this actually is a little better for pub night. You can't see it perhaps. It's Sport, Beer, and Gender. Promotional culture and contemporary social life. You can actually have an academic career studying these things. Let me get you to focus as best you can. Big screen may be better, I don't know. A definition of a hero, you might notice there that it tends to be male, even in the official dictionary. Nice, hindsight's wonderful. Tiger Woods in the mid-90s said athletes aren't as gentlemanly as they used to be. I don't like that change. I like the idea of being a role model. Well, maybe not so much anymore. And then some other things about disappointment and heroes and sports heroes and the like. On the face of it, let me introduce this. This book is about the fallen sports heroes, but it's really about much more. It's about us. As a cultural phenomenon, this is something that has become both ubiquitous and inevitable. At the same time, it continues to surprise and disappoint us. For some, the fallen sports hero might seem a small issue. After all, the carnage and collateral damage of sports heroes are insignificant when compared to more important stories that the media covers, the main events of the day. Still, we're drawn to the fallen sports hero saga, like a car crash. We're compelled to gaze at while driving past. It captivates us in ways we can't fully explain. While it's unlikely we may know the victims of the car crash or fallen sports heroes, we want to understand how this happened and how bad the damage was. We are, on one hand, simple voyeurs, and on the other, seeking to learn how to avoid a similar fate. We all know that what goes up must come down. We understand this both intuitively and as a basic law of gravity. Still, when it happens in the course of our own lives, to us or to those we care about, this often catches us by surprise. Whether we watch in amazement, awe, or fear, the experience is inherently destabilizing. Now, this often hits at a gut level, it seems to me. What we thought to be true turns out not to be the case. There may be a shivering realization that a seemingly solid structure can quickly become a house of cards. As David Rowe has observed, when this happens to our heroes, we must face the truth of scandal. In the realm of sport heroism, stardom, and celebrity, we increasingly face this truth. The history of sport is littered with scandal. In the early 20th century, eyebrows were raised over bribes and fixes by the Black Soxes, Say It Ain't So Joe Jackson, and later Hall of Famers Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker. Boxing champ Jack Dempsey's Loaded Glove. Yes, there was something in there. And whether women track stars such as German high jumper Dora Ratchen, these are really pulling it out of deep history, and Polish-American sprinter Stella Walsh were actually female. As the 20th century closed, the fallen sports hero narrative became common. Tabloid fodder, big splash stories included Muhammad Ali's draft evasion, wife swapping by Yankee pitchers Fritz Peterson and Mike Kekich, Mr. Baseball, Pete Rose's addictive betting, sprinter Ben Johnson's failed Olympic drug test, football legend O.J. Simpson's spectacular murder trial, boxing champ Mike Tyson's rape conviction and ear biting, just to throw in that for good measure, skater Tonya Harding's complicity in assaulting her Olympic rival, NBA star Latrell Sprewell choking his coach, and the running of the tabloid table by Australian cricketer Sean Warne in stories ranging from bookmaking to failed drugs tests to sexual escapades. The accelerated pace and diversity of these kinds of cases is seen in the last decade. We've become accustomed to doping and steroid scandals that have plagued cycling's greatest champions, raised questions about track and field's constantly broken records, and put more than a decade of baseball's leading performances, including the sacred ground of its home run records, in jeopardy. But added to this mix are some truly bizarre and puzzling stories that go well beyond the routine sagas of drug use, assault, and boorish behavior. More recent times have brought the front page disintegration of iconic golf champion Tiger Woods' life in a cloud of serial affairs, Brazilian soccer star Ronaldo's frolicking with transvestite prostitutes, star quarterback Michael Vick's cluelessness over dogfighting, Dean Richard, some of these examples you won't know, his role in fake injury theatrics of rugby union's Bloodgate, I can tell you more about, and a parade of wanton gunplay incidents. Now, there are important reasons to study the arc of the sport hero's rise and fall. Through such stories, we learn about our culture's moral contours. On one hand, we learn about those traits that make one great and admirable. On the other, we learn where our moral fault lines currently stand and how contemporary sensibility poses their negotiation. Further, we learn about ourselves and our capacities for granting a second chance to those we judge worthy of redemption. These stories tell of the heroic rise and fall, along with the prospects for redemption. And they remind us that they are always more than about the particulars of any one case. Still, it's really striking the number of variants that we've seen here about the sport hero panorama. In the pages of this book alone, the gamut of what might be considered a sporting offense includes not only substance abuse, from performance-enhancing and recreational drugs to alcoholism, to sexual improprieties, from bad sexual manners to sexual assault, to sex addiction, to homophobia, to questions over verification of sex. But also routine thuggery, aimed not only at opponents, but also seen in extracurricular gunplay and dogfighting, and questionable politics, demonstrating loyalties from good nationalism to bad. In each case, we see that particulars do matter. We learn from both the life history of the athlete and the nature of the offense. We see that both race and gender matter, as do the unique abilities of the athlete. In variant ways, these interact with moral stock-taking about the severity of the offense and the receptivity to redemption. We also learn about the interlocking ecosystems of big-time sport and big-time media, and how they have morphed into one. Through these stories, we learn that the media sport production complex is a self-righting vessel with many inherent conflicts of interest. Willing to throw a few wayward members of its crew overboard to purify itself, it will at the same time dole out homegrown discipline to those on its crew deemed worthy of saving. There are morals to these stories. Each reveals a moral line that has been crossed, how the moral offender responds, what should be done, and whether a second chance should be given. Such stories, accompanied by those in other quarters of the public sphere, mark a critical ebb and flow of contemporary culture. Tides rise for select individuals as media enable their advancement and naturalize this as common sense. In the sport marketplace, big media and big sport also underwrite the climate of entitlement and invincibility that has become the constant companion of the star athlete. Yet when sports heroes fall, the media's promotional tendencies that have played an essential role in their rise are largely swept under the carpet as they construct new narratives about individual failings and blame. The book considers how, in light of our identities with sport heroes, stars, and celebrities, this kind of complicity thrives. Here we learn there are many truths posed in these morality plays. We negotiate competing truths of sports heroes' heroic rise, truths about that fuel their celebritization, and truths that explain their fall. The hero conundrum, and I think we've got a hero issue on our hands. Living as we do in a postmodern pastiche of what's been called simulacra, it is reasonable to ask what has happened to the authentic. Maybe you've thought about that yourself. To many, finding something authentic to believe in has become increasingly difficult. In mulling that loss, many wonder, where have all the heroes gone? Indeed, thinking about what a hero is in contemporary times presents a conundrum. The problems and questions it raises are difficult, puzzling, and confusing. Even in looking for heroes, it may be less than clear what we're looking for. The media's unrelenting appetite for creating heroes aplenty in the service of promotable narratives only complicates this. Thus, what we're looking for may not be quite what we find. Further, the very notion of a hero is slippery. It is one of those things, as U.S. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart famously remarked about pornography, that while consensus definition is elusive, we know it when we see it. So while we all think we see heroes, often these are not the same ones, and there's real disagreements over who deserves to be so anointed. Is Kobe Bryant or David Beckham or Caster Semenya deserving of being a hero? Maybe yes, maybe no. This book considers whether understanding contestation over such terrain may be more valuable in cultural assessments than any firm resolution about what constitutes heroic action. Still, there's much thoughtful writing that suggests there's a good deal of agreement about classic accounts of the hero and heroic action. From the first print appearance of the term hero in Homer's Iliad to Hannah Arendt's account in The Human Condition come a set of archetypal understandings. As is suggested by the definition framing my talk today, these often default to a male standard. Here is the man of action, who is the embodiment of composite ideals that feature exceptional competence, character, and courage, marked by fortitude, resourcefulness, and noble deeds. As mythologist Joseph Campbell suggests, this archetype has resilient staying power over time and culture, and has been embraced in a heroic monomyth that has been narrativized as a journey. According to Campbell, I quote him briefly here, a classic definition, a hero ventures forth from the world of the common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Now, recently, there's been much debate over whether such classic notions about the hero have given way. Central to the evaluation is the reality that not many myths contain all of the stages outlined by Campbell. But more telling may be that increasingly there are structural tendencies for particular narratives to be featured routinely in the public sphere. Bearing on this, a book by Allison and Goethals, absolutely best thing I've ever read on heroes, they're social psychologists, called Heroes, What They Do and Why We Need Them, provides a ready retort to those who, in asking the question, where have all the heroes gone, veil the assertion that there is a paucity of contemporary heroes. Their reply in this book is they haven't gone anywhere. Indeed, they find that the dominant non-fictional hero named about half the time is a family member. And when joined by humanitarians, everyman, and underdogs, the contemporary picture of the hero pretty well lines up with the classic composite ideals. It also lines up with those who do not repeatedly get narrativized in the media. Still, as Allison and Goethals note, non-fictional heroes who are more likely to be narrativized appear to be making steady gains. Of those, sports stars lead the pack. Being named over 10% of the time as heroes, they are more than twice as likely to be so named as entertainers and heads of state. In hyper-commodified times, the media has much self-interest in defining public figures as heroic, and this works to make them stars and celebrities. Since we're in the library, let me quote the former Librarian of Congress, Daniel Borston, a historian. His attempt at an economy where the hero is distinguished by his achievement and the celebrity is a human pseudo-event who is known for his well-knownness, those are quotes from Borston. These distinctions have long since vaporized, leaving them to play out in a gray area along a two-way street. Now, much of this stems from the media's inherent need to make heroes into celebrities and to make celebrities into heroes. In today's world, the hero who is not mediated risks being just another unheard tree falling. Many, such as Lance Strait, argue that without communication there would be no hero, making the unsung hero increasingly impossible. To the media, the celebritization of heroes has large narrative and consequently economic value. Concomitant with this, to be a celebrity in a way is not enough. For the celebrity to have substance and to add value for the media machine, some dose of the heroic is helpful to give the star cultural and economic staying power and avoid being a quickly dimmed quasar. Of course, the contradiction is that celebrity adds value to the heroic while at the same time necessarily pollutes or dirties it, making the whole prospect seem somehow more artifice than real. Now, such contradictions and inherent stabilities over what a hero is or means in contemporary times would likely lead the anthropologist Clifford Geertz to conclude that the hero genre has become blurred. Well, let's look at the sports here. The blurred conundrum that underlies our search for heroes has only been heightened by the rise and domination of the sporting celebrity in our heroic space. Indeed, there may be no one place in culture more in need of a ready supply of heroes than sport. As Allison and Goethals have observed, quote him here, in the sports world, heroes abound, and more are guaranteed to emerge on the scene every day. Heroes undergird the basic business of sports. This is different, for example, than spheres such as entertainment, that, while not immune to using the heroic to enrich celebrity and stardom, entertainment is not fundamentally predicated on their stars being heroes, even though they may play them in fictionalized roles. Other public spheres, such as the military or politics, that feature the structural conditions conducive for heroism to actually emerge, do not share the same voracious appetite for heroic narratives that sports does. Even if this were not the case, it is hard to imagine a more efficient hero-making machine than the media sport production complex. Susan Drucker from Communication argues that because of its unique communicative necessities, modern sports fosters the illusion that heroes emerge from professional sports. However, she says, those so-called sports heroes are actually products of the celebrification of the pro athlete rather than the creation of the hero. Now, without resolving whether the celebrity chicken or the hero egg comes first, the sport hero presents a unique truncated variant of the celebrity species within the hero genus. Archetypal heroes are born when they're thrust into situations for which there can be little preparation. Yet in a very basic sense, this is not possible for the sports hero. Athletic competition, something described by one observer as a rule-bound, autotelic, or self-contained activity, brings a far more limited script of possibilities than life. These next two lines are my favorite in this piece. Life is not a game. Life matters broadly. And even though who wins and who loses in athletic competition may seem important to many, it is ultimately a performance experienced as a leisure, spectator activity and enacted in an increasingly professionalized and spectacularized marketplace setting. Consequently, anointing the sports hero as a true hero may be a cloudy endeavor. Now, there's little doubt that the notion of the sports hero is rooted in both mythology and romanticism. Charting this through American literary history, Michael Oriard sees the creation of the athlete hero as part of a larger and prevalent hero-making impulse, perhaps mostly by the sport press, but that's another story. For Oriard, the sports hero is largely a prowess hero, rather than an ethical hero. This tracks with Allison and Goethel's conclusion that, quote them again here briefly, although heroism can be based in either conscience or competence alone, most of the examples combine both qualities. Indeed, David Rowe's characterization, and I quote him briefly here, the heroic mythology of sport is founded on a close matching of the extraordinary physical feats of the sportsperson and extremist, and the imputed nobility of the performer implies the central tendency to combine the attributes and for one to implicate the other. Now, this tendency is at the heart of what Jan Harris has called the athlete-hero dilemma, where she argues such inferences from competence, athletic competence, to conscience, moral conscience, will almost always be hindered by three limitations of the athlete: shallowness, flawed complexity, and compartmentalization that impede the contemporary athlete's development and moral breadth. In the end, it may be unreasonable for us to expect the athlete, and even the athlete hero, to be more than just an athlete, to have a balance of competence and conscience in heroic attributes. Yet in our quest for meaning, we hope for a lot more. And the media feed that notion that extraordinary athletic competence is often undergirded by character and fortitude. Still, a very academic here, let me quote NBA basketball star Charles Barkley's famous remark that he was no role model, and what that reveals. Indeed, there may be no inherent connection. The ready shortcomings of the sports star on the conscience or moral dimension of heroism has led many critics to caution against the absurdity of athlete worship. As one person put it, because the mere fact of being well known is not enough to transform athletes into moral standard bearers. Because of this, much popular and scholarly writing on the sports hero continues to struggle with fundamental questions about whether the contemporary celebritized species can meet the test of veridicality for the hero genus. Unfortunately, firm resolution hinges on a blurry distinction embraced in what may be an irresolvable philosophical question. Is athletic heroism based on performance or action? Regardless, the angst that is evident in approaching the conundrum of the sports hero recognizes the limits of athletic heroic action. Related to this are fundamental questions about character building in the context of modern sport as it is played on the media stage. Now, as industrialization unfolded, middle of the 19th century, advocates for using sports as an important tool in toughening the socialization of boys in an increasingly feminized domestic environment made a very simple argument. It's going to be familiar to you. Sports builds character. In essence, the argument was that sport helps make boys men. But over the years, the residual shortcomings of this logic have revealed themselves. Thus, in today's climate, we're more likely to hear the insightful joke. It's a common one with sports sociologists. The joke is, we know that sports builds character, but we're not sure what kind. Given this, no study of the contemporary sports hero is complete without considering issues of character. Sports not only builds character, it reveals it, and what we may see may be good, bad, and or ugly. As a result, the study of sport and character is necessarily incomplete if we fail to consider why sports heroes matter and why they fall. Now, there are many reasons why the media treatment of the fallen sports hero is important. These stories are diverse, controversial, compelling. As David Rowe notes, each case plots, quote, a tabloid-lined path between homage and outrage, celebrification and vilification, moralism and nihilism. That these can be complex and potentially troublesome tensions to negotiate, especially for a child. And many children, male children in particular, are very captivated by sport. Troublesome tensions to negotiate for a child who has looked up to a sport hero as a role model. It has caused the American Psychiatric Association to offer counseling strategies for parents, teachers, and coaches to employ when a sports hero goes down. Their concerns focus on using this fallen sports hero as a teaching opportunity to point out how peer pressure can go awry, why practices such as performance-enhancing drugs that create unfairness and competition are wrong, why admitting mistakes and providing apologies are important, how fully modeling behavior after athletes can be problematic, and most importantly, how there are many other more deserving heroic role models in life than athletes. That the APA offers such tactics reminds us how destabilizing the fallen sports hero can be. And it points out the elusiveness of moral sensibility when it comes to understanding heroes in the context of sport. Now, for adults, too, this isn't just child's play. Consideration of the plight of the fallen sports hero presents a learning opportunity. Now, the teachers here, think about this, in this case, are largely the media who provide play-by-play of who and what went down and what this means. Ironically, this puts the sports press, that is better suited to its role as the toy store of journalism. I hope perhaps you've all heard of that. Sports journalists are not known to be the best and the brightest of the journalists we have working here. Sometimes ill-deserved, but it puts its role as the toy store of journalism front and center in the ill-cast role of moral educator. The sports press, like the entertainment press, and increasingly, as we learned in the surprise of the recent world financial meltdown, the business press, are far more disposed to being cheerleaders for their sectors and stars. Even recognizing the limits of the media's ability to serve as a moral arbiter, each case of the fallen sports hero offers the opportunity to situate meaning in the cultural system that birthed its likelihood. Unfortunately, even if the sport press could overcome its shortcomings of moral standpoint and a tendency to cheer, it often remains challenged by spotty understandings of the contextual complexities of sport socialization and deviance. Indeed, covering this beat and the regularity of sports stars falling qualifies it as a beat. It's pretty predictable. Demands more nuanced understandings of youth sports subcultures, institutionalized privileging, and sheltering of the elite athlete, and the limits that these may place on a human being's development. As a result, much sports coverage of the wayward hero tends to put disproportionate blame on the instrumentalities of the fallen individual. And thus, it's often temptingly easy for the media to encourage the sports system to rid itself of a bad apple and to return to its cheerleading role, rather than to focus scrutiny on the culture and complexities of sport and, more importantly, the role of the sports press in valorizing it. I make a joke with my students sometimes. One of the last places you look for media criticism is in the media. While the broad literature on sports socialization and deviance recognizes the increasing role that media plays in the privileging of elite athletes, many of the more prominent renderings of the big-time fallen athlete place much of the blame in certain quarters of socialization and organizational subculture. This is seen in a triad of books by a guy named Jeff Benedict. You can look them up. They're terrific indictments, really. He provides portraits of a misogynist jock culture of criminality that he sees pervasive in big-time college athletics, the NFL, and the NBA. He makes a case that for what can go wrong when disadvantaged men are cultivated into a life of privilege that valorizes hyper-masculinity. When added to organizational practices that implicitly condone and explicitly protect offenders, Benedict's portrait reveals a climate of criminal behavior and sexual aggression enabled by what has been called a dome of violence, not silence, that allows violence to occur in ways that it could not in ordinary society, and which also silences anyone who challenges it. But as Benedict notes about the reception of his work, many see danger in playing the race card and reporting results that unfavorably serve to perpetuate stereotypes including those about ethnic and racial groups. While other analyses of the fallen sports star look more explicitly to the psyche of the athlete in the context of sports socialization, the intersection of race, ethnicity, and hypermasculinity is likely to be perpetually sensitive in unraveling the cultural meaning of the fallen sports hero. Now, this is especially true when questions over morals, sex, and violence take center stage. Nowhere is this more evident than in cultural explanations of why a black male athlete may fall. Much work in the sociology of sport suggests that the meaning of the black male sporting body is almost always paired with predispositions to crime, drugs, and sexual deviance that are the stereotype hallmarks of hip-hop culture. It's clear that examining the larger topic of this book, Fallen Sports Heroes, Media, and Celebrity Culture, will mean that the media card will need to be dealt a hand along with those of race and gender. Now, while there are a number of fine examples of media-sensitive work, perhaps the most insightful and far-ranging is David Rowe's article called Apollo Undone, which builds on his earlier work on the falling of what he called Tragic Magic Johnson from AIDS. Rowe's work is especially important in that it locates a series of sports scandals in the broader functioning of media in postmodern times. Rowe's study speaks to the uniquely blurry lines of a sporting press that often engage the guilty pleasures of Schadenfreude and the moral relativism and the ironic detachment of postmodernity, in narrativization that weaves hard news with soft news and everyday gossip. I've called other places the sports pages, the gossip pages for men. Think about it. We used to have women's pages in newspapers. That the media engage moral meaning on such slippery turf, often with cavalier spirit, means that future studies that attempt to break new ground by taking into account the fullness of the hero-to-villain arc can help us better understand where the moral lines for public figures are drawn in our cultural sand. As one observer notes, such efforts demand asking some questions. Why and in which ways are sport integral to these scandals? What kinds of celebrities are subject to scandal? How do celebrity sports scandals inform political, cultural debates and discourses? Well, these are by no means lightweight questions about ephemeral pseudo-events, because they go to the very heart of the elusive politics of the popular. Each scandal becomes an opportunity to deconstruct and interrogate those social ideologies and structures to which all forms of popular culture are tethered. Now, in lived experience, our lives every day, such opportunities are discrete. As a result, we consider them iteratively, seeing their narratives as unique stories of individual failings. Thus, when an athlete's actions go awry, on the field or off it, we often tend to blame the actor. How could he or she blown such a wonderful opportunity in a rich life? We blame the actor rather than the structures and socialization of sport that may have wrought the problem, or the forces of media that encourage a certain kind of star to be born. This book takes us on a unique journey across the fallen sports hero terrain. Case studies are presented by an important group of scholars. I called in about 40 of them from across the world in sport, media, and cultural studies. Each treatment brings a unique vantage point on understanding the rise and fall of the sports star, the hero, the celebrity. In these treatments, we see that the narratives are not just about sport, but about broader issues of character, attribution of blame, the moral sensitivities and sensibilities that guide our judgments, and the conditions under which we may be open to giving second chances and allowing attempts at redemption. The book aims to provoke us to think not only about the differences in the way sporting heroes may be drawn in individual versus team sports, but also about those who lead and interpret our sport experiences as coaches and announcers. We have interpreters. We have moral leaders for this athletic activity. Now, these kinds of people uniquely inhabit the moral terrain. The moral crises that these sporting figures face extend well beyond offenses such as doping, performance-enhancing drugs, and cheating to unlevel the playing field. They illustrate offenses of entitlement and self-absorption, and they provide insight into arrested development. We learn what about no that many in the sports world don't understand. In closing, this book argues we need to look more coherently at the fallen sport hero phenomenon and understand the roles that both sport and media play in the hero to villain arc that has become an inevitable feature of the contemporary celebrity-infused culture. Such studies play on a broad cultural field, and they help us comprehend not only why certain sports heroes fall down and stay down, but also why others recover to have their stars shine again another day. That's it. And in too small a type, but I wanted to get it all on one page, the table of contents on the book. Like I say, there's about 40 different authors. This was a book that I had intended to run about 12, 15 chapters, but all across the world I got such resounding response for these scholars to tell stories in a way, study these things, this phenomenon. The book grew to 25 chapters and has been remarkably well received. I put the names of the athletes, and there are many more who I'm sure you can bring to the equation into play. Some of these athletes you won't recognize because they come from sports that don't get covered as much by the media. And they're in places like, what's this guy's name? Matti Nakainen. He was a Finnish sport ski jumper. We've got Dean Richard. He was a coach for a rugby union team. He had his one of his players take a baggie, basically, put it in blood, put it in his mouth, and then when the guy got sort of hit a little bit, or maybe he didn't get hit, the blood came out, and they got penalties called, and they got to get a competitive advantage. So this was This is a coaching strategy, mind you. We've got Don Cherry. Anybody Canadian? He's a voice of hyper-nationalism. He's the chief announcer of Hockey Night in Canada, which is the biggest program on the biggest sport in Canada. Got a fellow for John Terry who plays for Chelsea. Football, we call it soccer. A number of other figures here. Russell Coutts, anybody know who he was? Is. I think he actually charted the most recent. He's a Kiwi, a New Zealander, who won the America's Cup for New Zealand. What a great accomplishment. Took it away from the U.S. And then became a captain for hire. And I think he actually worked for Larry Ellison in this recent America's Cup. So his nationality was his falling issue, that he wasn't a loyal Kiwi. So, we see here, just a tremendous, we have a cricket player from India where it's absolutely a huge game, and there's an internet, actually cricket gets more of a world audience than than the NBA and I think the NFL. I mean, it's a huge international sport, so you'd really be surprised at some of these kinds of things. Well, let me entertain questions from you, or maybe you want to bring some fallen sports heroes that are in your personal backdrop to the fore, and be glad to entertain anything here about where all our heroes have gone. Yes.
Hard not to bring up, Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
In this discussion.
Yeah, we considered that, and he was sort of in this never place between being highly suspicious but not quite proven to be at fault at the point we put the book together. So there's other people that have written about him. I think what the interesting thing with Lance Armstrong is to see how long his heroic star stayed stationary in the face of adversity. We wanted to believe, and we wanted to believe. And only when, finally the facts were undeniable were we willing to say, well, I guess we got to let that one go.
Yeah,
I think
two books have just come out about him. I read the reviews of them, and I think one of them, according to the review, makes a point that the high stakes that exacerbated his crime was partly called out by the high stakes of the sport.
Well, that's right, and you could say that doping is, part of the game. But if you take a step back about sport, really, the whole point of athletic competition or training is to gain competitive advantage, right? So we have certain athletes that can afford, tremendous training and scientific regimens and diets and this and that. And that's all designed in a way to unlevel the playing field. Okay? But that's legitimate. Right? Somebody else who doesn't have those resources can't get that, but it's not considered legitimate. So we eat different, we're scientific about this and that. But then all of a sudden, if we use a substance that's on a list somewhere, it might even be our own blood, right? We call it doping. But the logic is, it's your own blood, for goodness sake. Why? It's not like a drug that came out of my body earlier. I'm putting it back in my body, and away we go. That's illegal. But there's inconsistency. And sport is notorious for inconsistency in drug policy. Absolutely striking. They will ban drugs that don't give you competitive advantage. Marijuana, cocaine, recreational stuff, on one hand. Those are for public relations reasons. Then they'll ban other drugs because it's gained a competitive advantage in the performance enhancement. But they put it all under the same roof, so drugs are bad. But it's a very different kind of offense. So it's interesting the offset, and there is. I've heard one sport actually marijuana actually gives you a competitive advantage. That's archery. Because shaking hands apparently it calms down. Anyway, don't know that. Yeah.
So last year I saw your talk on just the great discrepancy between women's media coverage of sports and men's media coverage of sports. Yeah. I was curious if this arc plays out in the coverage of women's sports media, or does it not play out until it's a story like Marion Jones or something like that that makes it then to mainstream coverage?
It's a very good question, and it's interesting looking at this. You can, gee, most of these stories are about men falling, right? Now, we tried, like the Dickens, to have stories of women falling in sport, and they were much harder to find. Now, a couple things going on there. Maybe the sports audience doesn't care as much, not as elite, as high in the media scene. But I think the Marion Jones case is a good one. We have a complex one. This is actually mirroring. This is a fight between women on two WNBA teams that mirrored the, Indiana Pacers and Detroit Pistons brawl that they had. And so we actually got a look here at what bad meant in female sport. And it takes on different contours. But very, very interesting to see. We saw that this is the piece here on the bully and the girl who did what she said. Anybody know who these two people are? Renee Portman and Pokey Chapman. Any of you know who they are? You know, we're in March Madness now, right? Yeah. And I use an example in my classes. I say, well, who do you think's going to win the NCAA championship? Right? What goes on in your head? What are you thinking about the men? But I didn't say men. I said NCAA championship. Okay. The standard is male. I have to say women. I have to name. The men I don't have to name. That's the process that's been referred to as ex-nomination. Right? It's so powerful, it's so obvious and evident that you don't have to say it. So you're struggling with Renee Portman. She was a very, very winning coach, longtime coach at Penn State. She was homophobic as heck. It was well known. Protected, surprise, surprise, by Joe Paterno. He eventually got fired for being homophobic and discriminatory against athletes for their sexual preference. Pokey Chapman had the opposite problem. She was a very well-respected coach at LSU. And she hit on a couple of her players. So, sexual improprieties both. But, the general, and these are, this happened in male sport. Your coach is hitting on the players, at LSU is not, it's just like Duke or North Carolina or Syracuse or something in the men's NCAA basketball. You would have a big story, right? But, a little spit in the water here. They've had to come back on it. I don't even know. We really don't have that many more. Not even, none of the, I don't think any of the sportscasters who put foot in mouth with a racist wisecrack or a sexist wisecrack was speaking. So what did they speak to? Well, men tend to put their foot in their mouth. Yeah, the one maybe. But the people who jury sport, who make sense of it for us, do the play-by-play, are way disproportionately male. That's why in the middle of an NFL game, you see the woman announcer. You go, oh, there's a woman announcer in the football game, right? On the sideline doing the personality thing, but not doing generally the important stuff of calling the game and what it means. Women are colored in a men's game. It's funny you brought that up. I put down two things on the back here. And they have a couple of lines I use a lot. One, they're both simple. That's why I like them. One is gender is the great divide of sport. Okay? If men's sport, women's sport, almost never play sport together. Mixed doubles, sort of, in tennis is unusual. So there's been a lot said lately about women fans coming to the fore and starting to watch sports more. They're becoming more sports fans. Evidence that NFL, more and more women are watching the NFL. Well, that's great. But what are we doing? Women are becoming fans, but what are they becoming fans of? They're becoming fans of sport where men still are on the main stage, worshiping on the main stage. So women are not, they're still up there worshiping men. Now that's a terrific thing if you want to, celebrate and worship men on the main stages of culture. It doesn't advance them.
More roller derby.
Yeah.
You mean more roller derby?
Yeah, roller derby. Right. And, about the only time, we've just been through a patch of Winter Olympics where we see some relative parity for the athletic achievements of men and women. But if you think about that, often it's to the feminine typified sports, the gymnastics, the ice skating, that are very gender consistent. We get uncomfortable sometimes, and there is a women's professional football league in the United States. Beats me where, but it doesn't play very much on the main stages. It's interesting. Some colleagues of mine have done studies of the amount of coverage of women's sports on ESPN Sports Center. The last 20 years, it's actually gone down. And it's only about, I think it's less than 5%. So we got quite an offset there.
We've got time for one more question, and then Professor Wenner will stick around to answer some questions, sign some books, have some wine.
Is Muhammad Ali a special case? I mean, was he taken down when he was stripped of his title, but then that got turned around? Would he be considered a fallen sports hero?
Yeah, well, he fell. He came back. He got to come back. So you get these stories. Some of them get to come back. Michael Vick got to come back, and that that was because we understand that there are operators at play, and Michael Vick had a whole public relations team putting together a television show. Went through a whole thing to rebuild his public image. And with Muhammad Ali, I mean, that's a real interesting case. I think ultimately, in that time, a less savvy media period, it was basically that the guy was a charming public figure. And it also interacted with that his position on the war, if you will, was increasingly seen to be right. So he carried the moral weight, and maybe really could be seen for a heroic act out of the ring. So, interesting case. He certainly became a remarkably loved figure, more so probably than anyone that in a way has fallen publicly. Tiger Woods hasn't come back. Maybe come back a little, not a whole lot.